Hello and welcome to another exciting CG Cookie tutorial. My name is Chris Bailey from C. Bailey Film on YouTube, and today we're going to be talking about the basics of animation. Let's get started. Go check out our Fundamentals of Animation in Blender course on cgcookie.com, or if annual membership isn't your thing, you can find the course as a standalone product on the Blender market. Links are in the description below. So I wanted to think of like a really great sort of basic intro animation tutorial that we could, talk about some of the beginning steps and understanding how animation works so that you can start doing it yourself in Blender. And I thought it'd be great to start with this pawn project that we made the other day, which is a really cool modeling tutorial. If you haven't done it yet, you can find a link in the description below. You can also find this project file over at cgcookie.com. The link will be in the description for that as well. So you can just skip ahead, download this, get started, or you can go follow the other tutorial and make it yourself. Either way, it's up to you. We're going to be taking this pawn and we're going to be creating a little cool kung fu animation with it and do a little matrix camera sort of freeze move thing. Hope you're excited. Let's start talking about how to do it. So the first thing we want to do is get our workspace set up so that we can use it. Now, if you're not familiar, Blender has all these different modular windows which we can change and move around and create any kind of window setup we want. And when you're working in animation, it's really good to make sure you've got the timeline down at the bottom here, and you can just click on this little icon in the corner of every menu, and you can use this to change whatever is presented in that window. So right now I've got the timeline selected. And we've got a couple other windows that are really, really useful for animation. And I'm going to go ahead and bring those up as well. I'm going to bring my view up a little bit. And if you come down to the corner of any window, you get this little plus symbol. If you click and drag up, you'll be able to split the view and create another window. So I'm going to create another window. And I think what I'll do is I'll make this one my graph editor. And the graph editor is a way of visualizing keyframed animation. But we're going to get into that more in a minute. So don't worry if you've never heard of that stuff before. We're going to be taking this thing from the absolute ground zero basics. So, okay, now I'm going to click the middle mouse button here and just pop out of my camera so we can see the space. We got this nice HDRI here giving us the lighting for our scene. And we got this simple sort of checkered pattern board here and a single pawn. Now, I want to have two pawns for this animation. So I'm going to select my pawn. I'm going to turn on my, my widgets here so we can see everything. And I'm going to hit Shift-D to duplicate and then G for grab and X. And I'm going to just bring it over here to this other square. Now, as you know from playing chess, I'm sure, that pawns can only capture diagonally. So I would need to have this guy, let's see, right here. We also need to have this pawn be a different color. It needs to be black. So let's real quick do that. Let's just go over to the shader editor. I just use this window here temporarily just to pop over to my shader editors. Now, if I change the color here, it's going to change for both of these because these guys both have the same material, this material called pawn. If I go to my material tab, you can see if I select this one, it says pawn, and this one as well. If I do the drop down menu, it's actually the only two shaders we have are board and pawn. So we need to have a little bit more info here. So I'm going to call this white pawn. And what I'm going to do is duplicate this material. So I'm going to select the second pawn here. And I'll click this little double paper icon. That will make this into a new material. If I do the drop down now, you can see we have three materials. And this new one is white pawn.001. I'm going to call this one black pawn. And to get this to change its color, a lot of the color is being derived from the subsurface color, which again, if you want to really understand that, go watch the other tutorial that talk about how to do all the materials and stuff. But I'm going to take this and I'm going to darken it right down. And then I'm going to come over here to the white and black on this color ramp. Or the white and gray, I mean, and change it to a black and a super black. I might bring this one up just a little bit because I like that little marbling that we have here. It looks quite nice. There we go. That's a nice looking pawn. So I got my materials done. I can just switch back over to my timeline and we're good to go. A couple of tips. Let's block out what the animation is going to be. Let's talk about what's going to happen. I want to have these guys I want to have like one of these guys, like this guy, jump up, basically something like this, and like get ready to hit the other pawn. And then like I want to have like kind of like a matrix camera swing around moment. And then I want to have him like swing and kick and this pawn to go and like fly off, right? Something that to keep in mind when you're doing animation, it's always going to be viewed through a camera. So it's really important to animate to the camera. So in feature film, where I work in my day job, we always work out the camera first. So we figure out what's the camera going to be doing? What's the rough blocking of our objects? What's the camera doing? And then the animators take it and they're able to animate the detail to the camera. So it's really important because you don't want to waste animation that's really not going to be seen by the camera. So just keep that in mind. So let's take that and let's actually start with that process. Let's use the camera first. So I'm going to jump into my camera by hitting 0 on my number keypad. And then I want to come over to my side view here and go to View, the View tab, And I'm going to come here to view lock. If it's not visible, you can just open it up. It's under the view tab itself here. And I'm going to click camera to view. This will lock my camera to my view. So now I can move my camera around and it will actually take this camera with me, which is going to be great. Now, to simplify things, you can see we've got some depth of field. Things are going out of focus. So I'm going to come to my camera tab, and right here on focus object, I'm going to click this color picker, and I'm just going to select the white pawn. Now wherever I go, it will stay focused on that pawn. All right. Now, in order to get a cool effect, I think I want to have a wider lens on my camera. So instead of a 50mm, I'll go to my focal length, and this is where you change the size of your lens. So I'm going to change this maybe to a 24, so we can get a nice wide effect. So when we swing around, there's a bit of warping. We'll probably even go further than that, maybe even to a 20. That looks kind of cool. And let's go ahead and figure out how we want this thing to start. Let's find a nice start frame for this shot. I think I'll start something like this. And I think I want to have the pawn kind of move into position. So I might, I'll frame it up nice like this, keep everything kind of centered. And I think I want to start my pawn here. I want to have him slide forward, and then we're going to do the whole attack thing. Okay, so I'm going to grab him on the X, so G and then X, and I'll just bring him right back, and I'll pop him there. So our first bit of animation is we're going to cause this pawn to move forward 1 square. So let's select the pawn, and let's come over here. We've got our graph editor, and we've got our timeline. You can see there's nothing visible at the moment because there is no keyframe information. There's no animation data. If we go to the orange square, this is kind of the main square you want to keep up. And here we've got the transform properties. This tells us the numerical value of the exact position of this little pawn. So I can move him around by just changing these numbers here like this. But also will show us, this will be our visual representation for whether or not there's a keyframe. And I'll show you what I mean. There's several ways we can make a keyframe. We can click these little dots here. So I could click like this. Now, which way do we want him to move? We're going to move on the X. So I'm going to click on the X right here. And that, you see, turns it yellow. Yellow means, hey, there's a keyframe here on this frame set for this value. And you can see what's happened in our graph editor. We've gotten this little dot and a line. And we've also gotten something over here in our timeline. We've got a little, this little diamond shape. This diamond here is the keyframe itself. You can see that imagery is repeated over here. And it's empty right here, and this is turned green. That means that there's a keyframe somewhere on this value for this object, but it's not at this particular frame where my playhead is. But if I go back to the first frame, you can see it turns yellow again. This shows me there's a full key, so this means this is where the key is. What's going on here with this? Well, look at the side here. See these numbers? We've got 0, 5, 10, -5 down here. This value, 3.1052, is right about here. Well, it's exactly here, between the 0 and the 5. So if I was to zoom in, you can see we get more and more numbers here. So we've got the 3 and 3.5, so 3.1 is right here, and it shows me a dot. So the graph editor is giving me a representation where I have time here along the horizontal axis, just like in my timeline here, and the vertical is the value, so whatever number is in the slot. And as this changes over time, we're going to get a graph that represents that motion. So let's do that. I'm going to move him forward, so I'm going to come forward maybe to frame 10. And on my viewport, I'll hit G and X, and I'll just position him wherever I want him to go, right here, and I'll click. Now you'll notice something else has changed. We've got an orange color now for the X location. Orange represents, basically it's telling you that, hey, you've changed the value. There's a keyframe. First thing it's telling you is there's a keyframe somewhere for this value. And now orange is telling you that, hey, you've changed that value, but you haven't set a keyframe here. And what that means is if I move my playhead now, it's going to source the value of the last or the nearest possible keyframe or the previous keyframe. So I will lose this position if I move my playhead. So look, if I just move a little bit, it snaps back because this is the last spot that we saved. We saved this spot. We said this is the position we want you to be at this frame here. And so it's going to hold that position until we set a new keyframe. So let's see what happens. We're going to grab this guy, G to grab X, and we're going to bring him forward just like that. And then we're going to set a new keyframe. And you can see now the graph editor's changed, right? So we've set it to -0.22 something, and you can see that's where this new point is at -0.2. Also, it's at frame 10. And now it's drawing this line in between this. And each of these, this line represents a value between these points. And you can see it's changing over time, and it slows down and speeds up, and then it slows down again as it comes to this other one. And so if we look at what that looks like, you can see that what Blender's doing is it's basically creating the animation in between these two spots. and it's got this nice speed up and slow down motion. We can change that by rotating these guys. So if I grab this handle, just like if you're working in a Bezier curve or something, you can just grab these guys with G and we can rotate them around and get a different shape. And that different shape is going to have a different animation feel. So like, look, now that it's sharp like this, it starts and slows down, which is actually kind of cool. I think that's what we want for this move. Now we can even like hit G to grab this and move it around, and you can see it's going to move its position. So this is really powerful using the graph editor. I could drag it out here to like frame 18 or frame 20. I can use X and Y to lock it. So I'm going to hit S to scale and X to lock it on the X, and I'll scale it out. And this will mean it will slow down. It'll just get to this position quickly and have this long tail where it slows. So you see it has that kind of feel to it. It's really cool. It feels like a slow-mo kind of ramp up, speed down. All right, I'm going to put this back. I'll scale it down a little bit, and I'll grab X, and I'll just stick it back on frame 10 because I like that. And now once we're here, let's go ahead and think about what our camera is going to do through this whole thing. I think it'd be nice if we're just rotating around the whole time, because I want to do this like really big sort of slow-mo feel where you kind of boom, slow and spin around the whole scene. So because I want to spin around the whole scene, it's really difficult to animate that kind of a motion with a camera. So what we want to do is actually parent this camera to something else that we can spin around. And we want to put that something else at the center of our scene. So I'm going to be spinning around these two guys. So I'm going to put something right here at this center point. So I'm going to go Shift A, come down here to empty, and I'll just grab a plane axis empty, and I will grab on the X and bring it here a little bit, grab on the Y, bring it here, and I'll just kind of center it right up in between these two guys. Now this empty, I'm going to call cam base, and I'm going to pretend like this is like the base of my camera, and there's like a crane arm between my camera and this base. So I'll select my camera base, and then I'll shift select my camera, and then in my viewport I'll hit Control P, parent to the object, and you can see now it's put the camera underneath this empty. So now whatever the empty does, the camera will follow along. So if I take this empty and I rotate on the Z, you can see my camera is going to spin around my scene. So this is how I'm going to handle this kind of rotation. All right, so let's go back to our first frame and let's start the camera rotating a little bit. I'm going to come to the Z value here with this camera base selected. I'll click there to create a keyframe. You can see it's no longer showing us the pawn, and that's because only the active object, the thing that's selected, is what's going to appear in the graph editor or in the timeline. And that's because of this button right here, only shows selected. If I was to turn this off, you can see we now have both here. We've got the pawn and we've got the camera base object. They're both visible on my timeline. So this is just a handy way to narrow down your focus. If you have like hundreds of things in your scene, it can be quite cluttered and difficult to see. All right, so I've got a keyframe here, and I'm going to come forward a little bit, maybe to frame 60. And I'll just do a little bit of a rotation like this. Maybe the other way. Yeah, I think the other way is kind of cool. And I will click a keyframe there, and you can see it's created it. Now, this is such a big leap, right, that I've got to really move around a lot to see it. And that's kind of annoying. So what I can do is, just like in the viewport, if you hit the full stop or the period key, you're going to zoom in on whatever it is selected. These keyframes are selected because I just made them. If I hit the full stop key or the period key, you can see that it changes the zoom of my view, and now I can see my whole the whole curve itself. So it's a really handy tool to use, just to hit that to zoom to everything. You can also hold down Control and middle mouse click, and that allows you to kind of move things around like this. Now I want this motion of the camera not to speed up and slow down. I want it to be kind of like a constant rate of change. So I'm going to change the style of these. I can either rotate these guys so that they're pointing right at each other, or I can drag a box around them, right click, and set this to linear. Now you see how we have all these different types. These are kind of, different effects and stuff. These are just, easy ways of getting those different types of shapes like I showed you at the beginning. The main three are constant, linear, and Bezier. Bezier is the default. Linear, basically, if I click this, you see it just makes it straight. It gets rid of the handles. So now the motion will just come to a sharp stop when it gets to this point. So come here and sharp stop. But now you can see it's not speeding up or slowing down. It's a steady, constant rate of change. Now it might be a little bit too fast here, so I might just grab this one and hit G and X, and I'll just drag out a little bit, maybe to frame 90. And now it's a bit slower. I think that works. Now I'm viewing this in rendered mode. You have to be a bit careful with that. If you notice up at the top left, I've got here the frame rate, and it's kind of all over the place. You can get an incorrect sense of timing with your animation if you're not careful. So it might be smart just to switch modes
until you get a really stable frame rate. Okay, so the next thing I want to have happen is I want this pawn to kind of leap up in the air, rear back, and kick the other pawn in the face and have it fly off. So let's figure out how to do that. Let me get the timing right first. So I'm going to just kind of go to wherever I want to be. I think this is a pretty good moment. Yeah, maybe frame 30. I'll select my pawn. And now I haven't set any keyframes yet for the Y or the Z. So if I was to move like on the Z now to kind of figure out where I want it to be, it's going to stay up there. You can see through all this because we haven't set a keyframe for that yet. So I'm going to be careful about that. If you're setting keyframes in specific channels, just remember, hey, if you make any changes to these accidentally, it might be tough to get it back to where you had it originally. So sometimes the best thing is just to go wherever you have one keyframe, even if you're not using the other values, to go ahead and set keyframes for everything, just so that you've got all of your location and rotation locked in place, at least at one frame, so that you can get back to it if you need to. So we'll come here and frame 30, we're going to have them jump up. So I'm going to actually do a hold frame. Now a hold frame is basically a keyframe where you don't change the motion at all, but you just sort of save the position. You're like, this is where I want you to be at this frame. So let's create a hold frame here. I'm going to hit I, and I can just actually go to location and rotation, and that will set a keyframe for all of those in one hit. Now we get something different up here. You can see we get this solid orange bar between these two sets of keyframes. And what this is telling me is that the values aren't changing at all. You can see it here. If I look, for example, at like the X location, if I double click and hit full stop, you can see how it's just a flat line. So it's not changing at all. It's not moving up and down on the vertical. So there's no change at all. So that's what this is, a visual representation saying, hey, these keyframes are identical in every way, and they're just kind of holding the position for this period of time. Now, using your graph editor can be a little bit confusing because you end up with lots of different lines. You can see we've got a ton of stuff here, and it can be a little bit tough to kind of select the thing you want sometimes, especially when you have things that are on like overlapping. You can see here I've got multiple. If I just keep clicking here, it's swapping between all the different rotations and the Y location, and it can be hard to kind of pinpoint which one you want. So what I recommend doing is going to View, and right here where it says only selected curve keyframes, I would tick that box. Now you can select the channel you want, and then you can come over here and it will just select that keyframe. So it won't cycle through everything. That's a really, really useful thing to do. Another helpful tip is to come over here to Preferences, and under Animation, come over here and take Unselected Opacity and bring it down. That will dim the curves that you aren't using. So it just helps you visually distinguish things a little bit easier. Just makes it simpler to work with. All right, let's get this guy going. So we've got our hold frame at frame 30, and then we're gonna have him jump up like this, and maybe rotate away from, that's right, I don't wanna move my camera, do I? I'll move my camera back. Let me untick my camera from view real quick so I don't lose that position. And I'll go forward again and grab up and rotate. Let's see, I'll just rotate him back a little bit, pop out, see, yeah, he's in the right position. Actually, I want to rotate him the other way, don't I? So he's going to pop up and rotate. So I'm going to go ahead and I and location rotation. So now you can see we pop up like this. And this is the point where I want my camera to kind of like swing around. But one thing I'm noticing is it's going to be a little tricky. He's a bit too far away. So I might bring him forward with this leap. So I'm going to come over to my timeline and use the up and down keypad arrows on my keypad on my keyboard, to get to jump between keys. I'll come to this keyframe and I'll just look at it from the top view, and I'll just hit G to grab and just bring him forward a little bit like this. And then you can see I'm orange telling me, hey, you're going to lose this information. So I can come over here. Instead of clicking all these, I can actually just hit I while my mouse is over these boxes, and it will do the same thing. We'll set another keyframe. So now he's going to kind of come forward. Nice. All right, now what we're going to do is we're going to freeze time. So let's jump into our camera, and we want to get a view first where we can see him. So we'll come here, and I'll take my camera, and we need to set some keyframes to the camera. We haven't done any of that yet. So I'll go back to the first frame. I'll do a hold frame for location and rotation by pressing I, and I'll come to here as just after he starts to move. I will hit I in both of these, and then I'll go forward a couple of frames, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 maybe, and then I'll pan up like this so that we can see him, and I will hit I there to get a rotation keyframe on my camera. And then this is the point where I want to like zoom around him. So I'm going to come right here to this keyframe, and I'm going to grab my camera base object, and I just want to get this. I'm going to create a new keyframe right here at this point. So I can click here to create a new keyframe, or I can even right click on this curve and go insert keyframe, and that will give me one right there. Now what I want to do is have this like really fast kind of like speed up, slow down, spin around my characters. So I'm going to take this keyframe and I will grab it, and I'm going to bring it in like this, and I'm going to come to this frame. Maybe let's see how long do we want this to last for. Let's go to this one, we'll hit play, and yeah, maybe let's try frame 65, and we're just going to grab this. I'm just going to bring it up all the way up, and we're going to keep rotating. You can see the higher we get, the higher the number is. We want to go all the way to like 360 because we want to like do a full spin. Something like this. So let's see, what does that look like? So he jumps up. We got the matrix spin. But I want to be able to like speed up and slow down with this spin, right? So it's getting harder to see my keyframes. So what I can do is hit A to select all, and then again, full stop. That will change my view. I'm going to change these guys to Bezier. So I'll box around them, and I'll right click, interpolate, Bezier. Now, you can see that it's continued to be linear up to this point because this keyframe is still set to linear. So it stays linear, and then we get to here is when it sort of Beziers out and does the speed up, slow down. And we get to the end, I want to slow it a little bit more, have the slow happen a bit longer. So I'm going to hit S to scale, and I'll scale it up like this. So we have a little bit more. There we go. That feels about right. This one maybe needs to be scaled a little bit too. So I'll scale that one out. Yeah, see how that feels like the Matrix, that kind of speed up, slow down. And when we get to the end of this, while the camera's still moving a little bit, we're going to do the kick. So right about here, take my guy, and I'm going to do a hold frame. And then I'll go forward, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 maybe. And let's rotate like this. And we want to actually make contact with him. So I might even intersect a little bit so we can kind of like get it to work. I'll come up like this, and let's hit keyframes for him. Full stop just to check my view here. Great. Okay, now let's keep the camera rotating. So let's go back to camera base. I can't see any keyframes. I'm like, where's my keyframes? It's all right. If I just come over here, select the channel, hit full stop, it will zoom to wherever they're at. If I hit A to select all and do it again, it will actually zoom to show me the whole thing. So now what I can do is I can go maybe to frame 100, insert a new keyframe here, and change the interpolation on this one to linear. And I'm going to grab on the Y and just bring it up a bit. Now, you'll notice that I changed it to linear, right? And it's made it linear after here, but before here it's still Bezier, so we're going to have this speed up and slow down, which is not really what I want. I want it to kind of be like a constant rate of motion again after we have this speed up and slow down here. But see, it's going to come to a complete stop and then start moving and then come to a complete stop again. So how do you get around this? So as to come here, it's always the keyframe before that sets the interpolation for where things are going. So if I set this to linear, we're going to lose all this nice motion here. And it'll just be a straight line to this and a straight line to this. So what I can do is actually use the curve. So I don't have to make it linear. I can keep it Bezier. But what I could do is I could scale down this keyframe really all the way down, right? So it's this fine point and the handles basically don't exist. And then I can come here and I can grab this handle and I can grab it up and just bring it up till I get a nice straight line. Now, if I really want to check this line, I can select those keyframes and hit full stop. That will change the view and I'll kind of get a better sense of the angle. And I can just adjust this a little bit. You can even hit S to scale in 0. That will scale it right down to an exact point. But now you can see it's not going to slow down. It's just going to kind of continue with a solid rate of change. Now this is a bit too much, so I'm going to bring it down like this, and then I have to correct this handle. Go a bit more. All right, now let's find the frame where the pawn connects. So right there. So I'm going to come here, I'll come back 1 frame, and I'll set a keyframe for the pawn here, the black pawn. So I, and then go forward 1, and let's actually get a nice sort of arc motion. I'll come out maybe like 5 frames, and I'm going to pop out of my camera just to get the angle right. Just kind of line this up, and I'll hit R to rotate, and I'll just come out like this. Let's see how this looks. Set I and I. So there we go. All right, let's keep this pawn coming back down. So he's going to go boom, and we want him to continue to fall down. Maybe by frame 90, we'll have him land. So let's get that right. I'll just come down and forward a little bit because he's going to have some forward momentum. And I will correct him a little bit here, but not all the way. So he's, and then I might rotate him over like this and bring him down. I and I. And then maybe I'll rotate him back. I might set this one to 0 and the Y to 0 as well. I'll just set keyframes here. Way too slow, so let's speed it up. I'm going to grab these guys, and we can scale keyframes. So I can grab all these guys and hit S to scale and drag them in, and they'll go towards the playhead. So that's why I put the playhead right there. There we go. You can go in further. And I'm going to get his position. I'm just going to send him off in the same direction. We'll do his rotation later. So I'll come to frame 100, and I'll just grab him all the way out here, let's say. And I will maybe just bring him up a little bit and hit I to set a location keyframe. And I'll come here to frame 100 again. Use up on my keypad to jump to that keyframe. And let's see, I'm going to switch to local, and let's have a look at which axis we want him spinning on. All right, I need to actually change it because I want to make the spin really easy. So I just want it to have on one axis. You can see he's kind of off kilter now. So if I was to rotate on the Y, he's going to be rotating like this. But I want him to be rotating in the direction that he's flying, right? He's also not really flying in a straight line, is he? He's kind of going off a bit. But that's all right. So what I'm going to do is I'll change his Z rotation. So I'm going to open up my curve editor, and I'll go to the Z rotation. I'll select it, and I'll hit full stop to jump to it. Now let's have a look at what's going on with the Z rotation. So it actually changes a little bit on this one, but I don't need it to, because I don't need him to be rotating around like this really at all. So I can just select this keyframe and hit X to delete. And that will make this a straight line again. And now I can go to my Z keyframe and grab it here. And I can turn it and rotate it basically until I get one of these axes lined up where I want it to. So if I G and Y, so grab Y, and you can see I can rotate him around until that X-axis lines up right. So now when he zooms off, I also want him to be pointing off in this direction. So let's actually fix all of his rotations. Let's come here, full stop. Let's not rotate at all on the Y. Let's just get rid of that. So now he's just going to rotate on the X. Now what I can do is I can come over here to frame 100, and I can take that X rotation, and I can just rotate it forward a few times and set a new keyframe. So he's gone forward. He's like done a bunch of loops. So now if we look at that X rotation, you can see it's this really big slope. We could also get rid of this one. So now it's just a really smooth, continuous slope. So he gets hit. Boom, 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 boom. Now he speeds up, and we want it to kind of be more of an instant, like as soon as he gets kicked in the face, that's the moment he starts to move, right? So let's do that trick we did before. Let's grab the X rotation keyframe, and let's scale X and just bring it right down. And then let's get the timing right. So I'm going to hit G and X to move it on the X until we've got that intersection happening. Now we do have a bit of a problem with this intersection. It doesn't intersect here. I'm going to back him up as he falls. So I'm going to have him hit, and I'll let the hit kind of pull him back a little bit. Or actually, I'll just move. Maybe we just want to move this guy faster along the Y position. So let's grab this guy here. And we're going to go to the Y location. And I want to just speed up his progress as he flies off. So I'll take the first keyframe. I'll delete the second one here, and I'll take this first one and I'll just scale it right down. So again, it's not speeding up, slow down. It's kind of instant. And then I can take this and I'll scale it down as well. So it's kind of like just a linear. And I'll line up my view. And I'll just grab this final one and grab X and just bring it in a bit. I also need to fix that timing. There we go. The whole animation for this guy, if we come to this point and we can select all of these keyframes in the timeline and hit S to scale, it'll scale him towards our playhead, and that will just speed up his exit. When we come around, things are pretty good, but as this kick happens, we start to lose these guys out of the center of our view. So as this kick starts to go, I'm going to select my camera and I'm going to set a hold keyframe for my rotation, and I'll go forward a bit and I'm going to rotate on the Z just to center the action up a bit, maybe down a touch as well. Keep that Y0, hit I to set a keyframe. The camera was a bit rough, so I'm going to grab the second keyframe and just select the top level. Now you can see we've got this summary thing. I haven't really talked about this yet, but when you have this view here in your timeline, usually you just see like the one keyframe. But you can always open this up, and this will tell you what object it is, what the action's called, and all the different transforms. And you can open it up and actually find individual keyframes. So if you just wanted to move like the Y rotation, for example, you could just grab it down here. You can see I have all these extra ones up here that are moving. These aren't actually keyframes up here. These are summary keyframes. So as you fold it up, it's just telling you, hey, there's a keyframe under the object transform. So if you open it up, you can find out where they specifically are. But when you fold it all up, it just gives you this top level summary. So wherever there are, no matter what it is, if there's only one keyframe on the Z rotation, there's going to be a diamond that appears for this frame. So I can grab this. I know I'm grabbing every keyframe. So I can just drag these out a little bit just to slow that pan down. Now we just want this guy to exit frame so we can't see him. So I'm just going to grab, I'll select him and I'll just speed him up a little bit. I'll grab the final keyframe and just bring it forward so that he exits frame right about here. And then what I can do is when he's out of frame, we can actually just animate him off. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to hit I over the camera icon. This will be render view. Now, if we want to have him disappear in a viewport as well, we need to come to this filter icon and select this monitor icon. And this way allows us to keyframe whether or not it's visible in the viewport. But remember, it's not the same as rendering. So you have to have a keyframe for the render as well. So we'll go to the next frame and then I can turn both of these off. And that will make him disappear. So he's just going to hide and we won't see him again. Okay, cool. So now that we've got our animation, make sure we're in our camera. What we can do is come over here to the render tab. We're going to come to the, make sure you've got ambient occlusion, bloom, and screen space reflections turned on if you're using Eevee. And then we go to the printer icon and we can set the output directory. I like to just do a double / and we can type in whatever we want to call our animation. And if you come right down here, we just want to change. You can have it. I recommend using a PNG file format that'll save each frame as an individual file. But then you have to bring it into some compositing software or an editing software to then output the final. This way you can, if you have an error or your render crashes, you can always just re-render the individual frames that you want. But if you want to just do a video straight up, you can switch to FFmpeg video and come here to encoding. And I recommend going with, let's see, MP4. It's a good one. And then you can leave it, it'll be H.264, and you can change the quality. This will just be sort of higher quality, means more file size. So we can just leave those as is. It's pretty good. And all done with all that. And the last thing we do is we can turn on motion blur. So we come back over to our little camera icon. We can tick on the motion blur box. And then we can come up here to render and render animation. And this will begin to render each frame of our animation with motion blur. Looks really nice. And there we have it, our final animation. I hope you enjoyed this and you learned a few cool tips about how to do animation in Blender. I hope this is a great springboard for you as you begin your journey as an animator. Enjoy. Please let us know any questions you have in the comments down below. Also, let us know if you've got any tutorials you'd like to see in the future. And please remember to subscribe to the channel and hit that like button if you enjoyed this video. That way you can find out when you've got more videos coming down the pipe. And don't forget to check out cgcookie.com. We've got a ton of amazing stuff over there worth checking out. Thanks so much. I'm Chris Bailey. I'll catch you in the next one. Until then, have a fantastic week.